Meditation is not extra credit. If meditation is something that you struggle with, start with what's in the book. Do it every day for 30 days. It was and continues to be revolutionary in my life. The thing that has changed my life the most has been diligently practicing those two things together over time. This is the way that we let God discipline us, is 10 and 11. I need to submit myself to that as much as I possibly can, as long as I possibly can, because that's when the big changes come. At least it has for me.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Greetings from Studio AA, deep in the heart of Texas. That was the voice of my friend, Mr. Casey W., that you heard here on this episode number 285 at the beginning of the episode, and you are going to hear so much more from Casey W. in un momento. But first things first, or would we say, I think primero is first. Primero y primero. This here episode is brought to you by Rachel and Laura and Brad and Lori and Jill. What, you may ask, did Rachel and Laura and Brad and Lori and Jill to deserve such a mention here at the top of this here episode? Well, they went to our website, www.soberspeak.com. They clicked on that little yellow donate tab, and they made, you guessed it, a contribution. So thank you so much, Rachel. Excuse me, my tongue got tied there. Rachel and Laura and Brad and Lori and Jill. This here episode is coming right out to Ewans. I started to say that's all ladies there, but Brad was in the middle. And I was going to say, this one's going out to all the ladies in the room or whatever. What is that saying? This one's going out to all the ladies in the house tonight. But Brad kind of messed that up. So we'll save that for another time when it's all ladies. Nonetheless, I, John, am just another bozo on the bus, will indeed be the chairperson for this meeting between meetings, and I am truly honored and privileged to serve all of you listening in. So take a seat, if you will, around this virtual table, and let's go ahead and get started. Remember now, no matter who you are or what your past looks like, you are welcome here. It is an open table for all, and we are glad you have joined us. All right, my friend, Mr. Casey W. is featured in this here episode. This episode is called Prayer and Meditation. Casey has been sober since 1990, the year of our Lord, 1990, and lives in Frisco, Texas. I know that town, Frisco, Texas. And this is one of those conversations where I have no idea where this conversation is going when we first start off, but we eventually kind of settle in and talk about a few subjects. We talk about prayer and meditation. Duh. That's the title of the episode. Of course, you're going to talk about that, John M. We talk about love, the subject of love. We talk about Dr. Bob and some of the anecdotes from his life and several of his writings. We talk about involvement in the three sides of the triangle and so much more. That thar is just the tip of the iceberg. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Casey W. If you're in your automobile, maybe you could do it just like a little clap or something. Well, if you're driving, don't take your hands off the wheel, but wherever you are, just do a little, clap or just a little fist pump or something like that. Help me to welcome Mr. Casey W. And as always, well, I shouldn't say always because I don't always have this, but as per normal, we will have plenty listener feedback at the end of this here episode. Enjoy, Casey. Okay, everybody. So I say we, it's just me and you, actually. There's nobody around. It's just me. Me, Casey, are sitting here together. I started to say we are sitting here with Casey, but, Me, and what's the old saying? Or do you have a frog in your pocket or whatever? Anyway, so we are sitting here today with my dear friend, Mr. Casey W. So first things first, Casey, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, give your sobriety date if you so wish to do so, and tell people who are listening in where you live in this great land of ours.
Casey W., alcoholic, sobriety date January 13th of 1990, and I am from beautiful Frisco, Texas.
We're in the same neighborhood.
We really are.
Well, I mean, not neighborhood.
It'd be a long walk, but I could walk. I could walk.
And so just so the listeners know, if you've not heard Casey W. before, he's been on, 4 or 5 other episodes, something of that nature.
Something like that.
We attend the same groups together, mainly the Frisco group and the Frisco Fourth Dimension group. So we see each other a lot. And whenever I hear Casey share in a meeting, and I was just telling him this actually before we started here, and that is, Casey, it doesn't matter what the topic is, he seems to kind of on the fly, similar to David G. in a lot of ways, he on the fly seems to come up with something to say that is, for me, helpful. It's insightful. And so I just like to have Casey on the podcast here. And today, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand. I don't even really know where this is going to end up, because what we've done before is we've started with a particular subject and then it morphs into something. It's an organic conversation. And that's how I like these things to be. All right. So what I'm going to do is start out with a subject that is kind of at the forefront of my mind for whatever reason. And that subject is the subject of love. And I told Casey, I'm going to try not to get too hippy-dippy with him on the actual podcast. But love is mentioned, many times within the book and within our literature. And love and tolerance is our code. And there's many other references. A really good podcaster would have done a little bit of research.
Nope, that's just mediocre. I like it. I like what we're doing right now.
Before we got on and seen where all the references to love are and the big book and the 12 and 12 and all that sort of stuff. But you're stuck with me. So we're going to wing it. So when I bring up that subject to you regarding love, what comes to mind for you? Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. First, thank you for saying that about us being together in meetings. That's a very kind thing to say. I feel the same way about you most of the time. Sometimes your shares are a little off, but most of the time they're pretty on topic. You talked a little bit about love before. The first thing that comes to my mind, and man, you said one that probably should have been the first thing, which is love and tolerance of others is our code, right? That's the way I'm supposed to live my life from moment to moment. If I'm spiritually fit. When I think of love in the program, I also think of Dr. Bob's last message, kind of his last public address before he died. It was real short. And if you've never read it before, I recommend looking it up. Dr. Bob's last message. It'll come right up in a search. And he said that the whole thing boils down to love and service. Our whole program boils down to love and service. And so that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I think we tend to think of romantic love, when we say the word love, but I think about this idea of brotherly love. We a lot of times end our meetings with our Father, right? And when I think about that, I think about that really, and this is getting a little Emmett Foxy, but the idea that if we had a God, it would be an all-knowing, all-powerful person who loved us, right? And then by saying our Father together, I think about, this sisterly and brotherly love. If we all had one Father, then we'd all be brothers and sisters, right? And how would you treat your brother and sister that you loved? And I really learned about love in Alcoholics Anonymous. I absolutely believe my parents loved me. I had a very good upbringing. My parents did the best they could. And that first sponsor was the person who really showed me what love was, the respect that comes with that, the attention that comes with that, listening, doing what you say you're going to do, and taking a genuine interest in me. This was a person who was a complete stranger to me, a very short period in time before, and now is helping guide me through this process, and so I feel like that was the first place where I really saw that demonstrated, the brotherly love demonstrated.
So what I'm thinking of when you're talking, how we kind of like think about our own experiences regarding this. And I think about my sponsor, Bob, when I first came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember sitting on my apartment floor on the telephone, the regular telephones at that time. And he was telling me when I was kind of going through everything, I was just a bundle of nerves. And I think about him on the phone saying, John, I love you. We love you. We need you here. We want you here. And I remember hanging up the phone and I just started sobbing because I didn't know what was going on at the time. I didn't, kind of like cognitively think, I think I'm feeling love right now. But afterwards, if I had some retrospect over the years, it was one of my first experiences, my first exposures to real love. And like you said, it's not like it's people loved me before that. It's not like I don't think I ever felt love, but I really, really felt it at my core. And I knew that he had no expectations of me. Right. He just loved me. And I want to read this because while you're talking there, I looked that up.
Good.
Dr. Bob, this is what Dr. Bob said in it was his last farewell speech, I believe.
I think it was at like an international conference.
Okay.
Like World.
And was it one of the last times he ever spoke?
I believe so.
Okay. It says, my good friends in AA and of AA. Oh, that's interesting. This is the first time I ever noticed that. So he's talking about like all the, spouses and,
right.
All the non-alcoholics.
Definitely a family affair, especially in the early days.
Yeah. I get a big thrill out of looking over the vast sea of faces like this with a feeling that possibly some small thing. Dr. Bob, right? This is him. He said, some small thing I did a number of years ago has played an infinitely small part. There's real humbleness there, right? In making this meeting possible. I also get a thrill when I think that we all had the same problem We all did the same things. We all get the same results in the proportion to our zeal and enthusiasm and stick-to-itiveness. You don't hear that term much anymore. It's a 1950s term.
Yes.
If you will pardon the injection of a personal note, Dr. Bob says, at this time, let me say that I have been in bed 5 of the past 7 months. He's obviously very sick, and my strength hasn't returned as I would like. So my remarks of necessity will be very brief. We should all take that into mind. There are 2 or 3 things that flashed into my mind on which it would be fitting to lay a little emphasis. One is the simplicity of our program. Let's not louse it up with all Freudian complexes and things that are interesting to the scientific mind, excuse me, but have very little to do with our actual AA work. Our 12 steps, when simmered down. Think about that Saturday Night Live. Yeah. When simmered down, Dr. Bob had no idea it was going to be a simmer down skit on Saturday Night Live years later. When simmered down to the last, resolve themselves into the words, quote, love, unquote, and, quote, service, love and service. We understand what love is, and we understand what service is. So let's bear those 2 things in mind. Let us also remember to guard that erring member, the tongue. And if we must use it, let's use it with kindness and consideration and tolerance. And one more thing. None of us would be here today if somebody hadn't taken time to explain things to us, to give us a little pat on the back, and to take us to a meeting or two, to do numerous little kind and thoughtful acts on our behalf. So let's never get such a degree of smug complacency that we're not willing to extend or to attempt to extend to our less fortunate brothers that help, which has been so beneficial to us. Thank you very much. Well, I did not get a little verklempt, is that the word? Reading through that. All right, so the episode where I'm interviewing you, I've been talking mainly thus far, which I don't like to do. So any thoughts on what I just read from Dr.
Well, I hate to say it, John, but I'm sure that the listeners enjoy listening to what you have to say on some of these topics. So I'm glad that you're talking. I certainly enjoy it. I would say, the humility is obviously something you pull away from that. You said it. They said that he sponsored something like 5,000 people in the time that he was sober, which basically is like sponsoring a person a day. Yeah. So if you ever think you're in the in the sponsorship race, I think the best we can hope for is second. And everything that he did to bring the program to us. I also, when he said stick-to-itiveness, I don't think that's a word. Dr. Bob was famous for making up little euphemisms and colloquialisms of his own that people are like, what is he talking about? I don't even know what that means. And so I absolutely love that about him. And as we start to talk about things like, along with love, you and I talked about what about 10, 11, and 12 and some of those other things. He was one of the absolute gold standards for searching, right? He was a very well-read guy. He read a ton of spiritual literature. If you ever are interested in learning more about Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers is a great place to learn that. And they talk about him reading, 1 or 2 hours a day. And we think of Dr. Bob a lot of times when if you know about the history, you think about Dr. Bob being Christian, but he read the Quran, he read about Taoism, he read about he even read about like voodooism and mystical arts. I mean, he was interested in broadening his spiritual experience.
And for the 1950s, especially in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that's really ahead of your time.
Amazing. Bill and Bob were really pretty ahead of their time when you read about some of the things that those guys were up to in early AA. They were definitely stepping out of the norm in a lot of ways. And Dr. Bob was one of those guys that really stepped out of the norm. And there was probably no person that was more interested in the newcomer than Bob, and he says it right there at the end of that, his talk there.
One of my favorite stories about Dr. Bob is that, I think most people know this. Maybe people who are new into Alcoholics Anonymous do not know this, but his profession, he was a doctor, but he was a particular kind of doctor. He was a proctologist.
Yep.
It is kind of funny, right?
So good.
Right? But here's the story is that as you know, he got sober for a little while. He went off to a medical convention. He came back. Dr. Bill was there. And Dr. Bob's last drink, and the reason June 10th, 1935 is the Founders Day is because Dr. Bob went to... Well, first of all, he got smashed at the medical convention. Then he came back, but he had to do surgery that next morning.
Right.
And so Bill W., in order to calm his nerves, gave him a couple of beers before he went in to have that surgery. And so my thought process always goes to, I don't know who that guy was he was operating on.
Right.
But he is a bit player in this whole thing of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got operated on.
Yeah, Godspeed. Hope you're all right. I mean...
And it wasn't, it was a proctology operation. I'm not learned enough, but it had to, it was fairly serious, what they're doing.
Yeah.
So.
One of my favorite anecdotes, it's in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. There's a guy who learns about AA and learns about Dr. Bob, and he's interested, in quitting drinking. And then he finds out that Dr. Bob is a proctologist. And the guy basically says, well, if that's the way they're doing it, I'm not interested.
Oh my goodness. All right. So I want to kind of shift gears here a little bit. I know like earlier this week, I was talking to you and you were on the way to a meditation. And so, and this is all part of the process, right? It's all part of the journey. It's all part of the seeking, the asking. So what did you go to earlier in the week?
So some friends of mine invited me to an AA meeting, and the theme of that meeting was meditation.
Okay, so it was an AA meeting.
It was an AA meeting.
Inside a church.
That's right.
Gotcha.
Yep. It was an AA meeting inside church. And so the format of that meeting, and I've gone to some similar meetings, and I love these kinds of meetings, darker room, usually a little bit of a smaller crowd. Sometimes it can be a bigger crowd, but someone reads from the literature, and then you meditate for a period of time.
How long?
So in this meeting, it was 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then they reread what they did, what they had read in the beginning. And then there was kind of 30 minutes of sharing. And so I've gone to several meetings like that I really enjoy. That was an open meeting. So there was some spouses and things like that at the meeting as well. And there, we talk about enlarging our spiritual experience, right? And the book talks about be quick to see where other places are right. It talks about, it kind of gives a little bit more of a description of meditation in step 11 in the 12 and 12, right? And so I think for me, I love to meditate at home when I get the opportunity to. I love to meditate with my wife. There are, and you and I have talked about this, there are times when we'll go do yoga together, and a lot of times it's more of a meditative yoga than a hot yoga, which is great. And sitting in a room with a bunch of drunks and their spouses and sitting together for 30 minutes quietly is a different experience for me. And it's something that I tend to carry with me when I'm able to do something like that. And so I try to participate in those types of things as much as I can. Anytime somebody says, hey, we've got this meditation thing we're doing, I am all in. Like, I'm interested because I feel like that's one of the places where I could grow the most. Sitting quietly is not my natural state, right? I like to talk. And so anytime I can do something different or new around that, man, I'm interested. I'm all in.
Okay, so there are people out there, and I was this way, especially when I was first getting sober, and you hear this all the time. Well, I can't sit still for that long. I can't meditate. I understand that other people do it. My friend Buddy C always says, trying to meditate is meditating. Mm-hmm. Even if you do it for 1 minute, yep. That's meditating. So talk to me about, did you immediately start being able to meditate? Was it easy for you right off the bat?
So my first sponsor early on, 6 months of sobriety, was Buddhist. And he described to me the kind of meditation that they describe in step 11 of the 12 and 12, which is taking a prayer and taking it word by word. So the way it describes it in the 11th step of the 12 and 12 is the St. Francis prayer, right? And so the start of that prayer, Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, right? And so the way the meditation works is, Lord, what does that word mean to me? Right? Make. What does that word mean to me? Lord, make. What does that phrase mean to me? Right? And you go through the prayer in that way. And that's the way you meditate. That was something helpful to me because it was a little bit more active, right? It was something where I was still sitting quietly and still by myself, but it gave me something to think on. And so that just as it describes and there's meditation that describes in the big book too, that's more of an active meditation, right? The meditation that it describes in the big book, it can be a little bit confusing when you look at it, right? Because we talk about our nightly inventory and we talk about that more like it's step 10, but really the nightly inventory that's described is in step 11, right? And so that's my meditation, When I retire at night, where was I selfish, resentful, dishonest, or afraid? And asking myself those questions is part of the meditation. So I encourage people who are new to meditation, right, and are uncomfortable with it, just do it as it says it out of the book, right? Because to me, that's the baseline. And whatever I do for meditation on top of that is great. I try not to get away from that baseline upon awakening, what we do throughout the day, and when we retire at night. I try not to ever move away from that baseline. And I think that if people start there, because if what you start with is, I'm going to go to an app and I'm going to listen to bowls, right? And I'm going to do it for 10 minutes and sit quietly, people get discouraged, and people are like, I can't do that, But I think if you start out of what's in the book, I think it's a great place that's a launching point for doing something like sitting quietly for 30 minutes in a room. I know people that have done days or weekends of quiet, and you work up to something like that. The other thing I would say is, I know there are also people with mental and emotional challenges that's can be hard for them. And those are not the types of things that prevent people from sitting quietly for 30 minutes are not something that is part of my affliction, but I know that other people have had that, and that's still no excuse for not doing the meditation, right? Out of the book. I think it was Gary Kay who said his morning routine is like 3 to 5 minutes. I mean, this is not a big commitment that we're making. When I think about the time that I spent thinking about a drink, going for a drink and drinking a drink, it was a lot more than 3 or 5 minutes in the morning. That was pretty much my entire day. And so I can make myself 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes when I get the chance, like this morning, Saturday and Sunday is a great example, I can usually take some more time, right? But sometimes when I'm working and the kids are up and, we got stages of life, 3 to 5 minutes might be what I have. And that's okay. I can get what the book says to get done in 3 to 5 minutes.
And you just have to look for those opening. I think I told you recently that I remember when Okay, so there's a difference between being, single and, having time and being married, and then you start having kids and all
Little
that sort of stuff.
kids and
Right.
job and
Right. They don't, they're not on your meditation schedule.
they're nuts.
And my son, he turned like 2 or 3. I think it was 2, if I'm not mistaken. My wife would know, but there's a certain time to where all of a sudden they're not in a crib anymore, and now they're in a little bed, and they realize that they have a little freedom, and they can get up out of that bed and roam around the house if they want to. But we want them to be going to sleep. Right. So the reason I describe this is because it's right out this door right here. My son, he would get up out of that room, and he would start to wonder. But as long as I was near him, basically, he wanted to know we were near, right? He wanted to know I in particular was near at that time. And I would sit outside this door and just close my eyes, and he would suck on his thumb, and he would get his little blankie, and he would watch me as I meditated, and that would put him to sleep. And so I guess my point through all that is that sometimes it's just about it's looking for the openings, where can, and when it was actually really beneficial for me and, for both of us. I'm sure he doesn't even remember it, but I remember it being very important for me.
So I'll flip the script on that for you. How was it when you first started? Like, how did you find meditation when you first got sober?
Yeah, it was tough. In fact, meditation is, I would say, a lot more talked about nowadays than when I first got sober.
Right.
It was a little bit hippy dippy, back in the day. It wasn't something that, like I remember I had to go to the library and I would find this book and I'd have to, what do you call it? Dewey Decimal Systems, right? I would, that long box you take out there and you'd see something on meditation, you check out the book, you take it home. And then I would start like thinking about like, so they would say, like light a candle, watch that, think about these things and all that kind of stuff. But I would start thinking about pizza and beer and, my mind just wasn't focused, which is understandable. But eventually I don't know, really, Casey, it's been the last like 10, 15 years, but I didn't do much meditation at all. Yep. Well, when I say much meditation, like, kind of just like sitting and listening. Yep. Now I did a lot of the stuff of like yoga and walking and all the active stuff. And for me, one of the biggest things that I really loved is I would read through the big book or the Bible or some other sort of literature, and I would find something that I liked, and I would write that down, and then I would take it out, and as I was walking for a few miles, I would say that particular phrase over and over to myself.
Like a mantra.
Yeah, so the short story is that it was not easy in the beginning, and I still have to kind of work at it. And sometimes my mind just still floats off, but the most important thing, I think, is to just keep practicing.
Well, I think, too, the thing that's really cool about meditation is that, I don't know about you, but for me, before I got sober, wherever I was, I wanted to be somewhere else. Yeah. When it talks about restless, irritable, and discontent, to me, restless is not being where I want to be, not being satisfied where I am currently. I remember those frantic early calls to my sponsor, right, about whatever the emergency was. And he would say two things to me. First thing he would say is, have you prayed about it? Because when we look at step 10 out of the big book, continue to watch for restlessness or selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when these crop up, we ask God to remove them, right? So that's the first thing he wanted me to do, was to talk to God about it, right? And so, of course, I'd call him. I hadn't prayed about it. Why would I pray about it? I need concrete answers, And so then I got into the habit of quickly saying a prayer, not meaning it before I called him, like, yes, I prayed about it, and obviously that practice got better over time. But the second thing he would say to me would be, how are you right now? And obviously the chair I was on wasn't on fire. This was me projecting about something I thought was going to happen in the future, or something someone said to me in the past. Because how I was right now was generally like sitting in a chair at home talking to my sponsor on the phone. That's how I was right then. And so I think that meditative practice, trying to get used to sitting in the moment, is kind of just a great expression of enjoying the now, being where my feet are. There's no time when I'm more in tune with where my feet are at any given point in time than when I'm sitting quietly. And if you can manage to do that for a while, there is nothing more, for me, more energizing than when I can spend a good amount of time in meditation, getting up from that and really kind of feeling, the peace and calm that I think the program offers us,
Right. As you were talking about that, I just kind of took a deep breath in, and I was thinking about how it does make me feel. And it is like getting in touch with the source, as much as I can in this, frailed
We're
body
having a human experience,
right.
John.
Right.
That's not going to change as far as I know.
Okay. So then we've talked a lot about meditation. Let's kind of shift gears and talk about prayer. Which I know that they are, they are woven in together. I get it, but so anyway, what comes to mind for you when I bring up the topic of prayer?
I think for me, one of the things that's most important for me to remember for prayer is what my first sponsor told me and my current sponsor talks about all the time. We say the 11-step prayer is the St. Francis prayer, but my sponsor says really the 11th-step prayer is the knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry it out, right? And so my sponsor always taught me that if I'm going to pray for something, that is what I'm going to pray for, and otherwise I am saying thank you, right? And so my prayers are not usually very long. My prayers are usually a conversation with God about what's going on in my life today. And really, the early AAs, they focus so much on morning quiet. When you read through some of the accounts of that and some of their later quotations, they talk a lot about that morning quiet time. And if I can start my day every morning on my knees, just recognizing that God is in charge, and your will, not mine, be done, that's usually enough for me prayer-wise, right? There will be people that I know that are struggling, right? And I don't pray for them to be well or for them to be good or for them to get whatever it is that I don't pray for those things, right? I just say, hey, these people are on my heart. This person is sick. I know they're struggling, and I struggle with them struggling, And then I think the gratitude that comes, with saying thank you for things and not saying thank you for the same thing all the time, trying to recognize the big and the small. To me, that's what prayer is about. And then throughout the day, pause when agitated or doubtful, and say, thy will not mine be done. Very rarely, John, have I said, thy will not mine be done, and then done something incredibly stupid afterwards. You know what I mean? What about you? What does prayer mean for you? What does prayer look like for you?
So when you were talking, I was thinking about when I first got sober, and I went to a Bible study group.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this is not a knock on anybody or anything, and everyone's got their different ways. But I think the traditional Judeo-Christian values are not values, but the methodology when it comes to prayer is to pray for some real specific things,
Yep.
like take away this illness,
right?
Help me with this, whatever the case may be. And there was something that was it didn't feel right for me. And at that point I'd probably been sober a couple of years, and I brought it up in the Bible study.
Yeah.
I said, I don't feel right about this. And somebody within that study, I was young and impressionable, and I didn't know really what was going on. And I remember they said to me, well, if you don't pray for specific things, you're doubting God's power, something of that,
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so I walked away from that, and so I kind of played around with it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
I started praying, but I could tell in my gut it felt right for me when I just prayed for His will to be done, His will to be done, and not wanting to kind of control the situation. And for me, prayer really is more about. It's what happens after I do everything that my little pea brain can do, and then I get stuck, and I don't know where to go from there. I've tried all the rational stuff, and I'm just I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So then I pick up prayer. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't pray like in other words. I don't have to be at the end of my rope in order to pray, because I do pray. I pray a lot. And it's so weird for me too, Casey, in that I pray and I meditate, I would say more than the average person.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm saying that is because it's so hard to believe that I'm this messed up. And I pray that much and meditate
Some are sicker
that
than
much.
others, John.
Right.
I don't know what to tell you.
I can't even imagine where I would be if I wasn't praying and meditating, because it's not like a cure-all. I mean, I still am just, I'm still selfish and dishonest and resentful and afraid all the time. Yeah. But if I didn't have, the prayer and meditation in my back pocket, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting, the prayer study. I don't know. My first sponsor, when the talks in the book, it says we had to quit playing God. It didn't work.
Right.
I was like, what are you talking about? I don't even believe in God. I'm like early on, and he starts to talk about, okay, well, do you think you know what's best for you? Right. That's how he kind of describes how I play God. Right. And we went down that route together, and it's like, I want to do this, and I want to be this, and I want this in my life. And it's like, okay, here's where you're playing God. You're trying to plan and design your life in such a way, because I have seen people go through some very difficult things over the course of my life, some in recovery, some not in recovery, right? And watch them go through very difficult things. And maybe it didn't turn out the way they wanted it to. And, it was exactly what they needed at the time. When I think about in my mind, the worst, I'm just going to use air quotes, the worst things that have happened to me in my life, when I look back on those, it was critical that those things happened, and I went through those things. So when I'm praying and I'm saying, make this happen, it's just like, I don't know, my relationship with God feels like my relationship with other people, in that when I'm focused on what can I do for God, right? How can I serve God, right? Rather than what can I take from God, that relationship tends to go pretty well. That works for my wife, for my kids, for my friends, for my work, just every place tends to be. And that's, we talk about the spiritual awakening, and in the back of the book, it says the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. One of the biggest things in my personality that needed to change was I needed to figure out what I could bring to situations rather than what I can take from situations. Because if I'm figuring out what I can bring to situations, I can always think of more that I can bring and how to make it better. And when I think about what I can need to take from a relationship, I can always think of more and how much more I need to take from a relationship. So I can either become happier and happier and happier when I'm seeing what I can give, or I can become more disgruntled and upset and resentful and fearful when I'm not taking away all those things that I think I should be taking out of the relationship.
Right. For whatever reason, this just came to mind where you were talking, and I was like thinking about how I know you sponsor a ton of guys, and to me, what you were just explaining there just sounded like some real good sponsorship advice that not only you could give to guys that you actually sponsor, but people who are listening in, right? And could take that and could pass that on. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and this just came up in my little pea brain one more time, is that, as you know, I've had this podcast for now like a few years. I think it started at the beginning of 2017.
Yeah, I was on one of those first Jinky podcasts that you did, John. Yeah, duct tape and bubble gum. I feel like we just did it on our phone. I'm not even sure what equipment you had.
That's right. I remember those first ones just getting them out there. I'm like, I
So
don't know.
good.
Let's just see.
So good.
Right. Let's see if this gets any traction. And I was like amazed. Like, oh, wow. Somebody actually wants to listen to this crap.
Yes, I love it.
Not me crap. But
Yeah.
I mean, me crap that the guests were like you were. I mean, I can see they wanted to listen to you. But nonetheless. And the reason I say that is because I had tons of people that wrote in over the years, and they say, "Will you please publish your story, whatever the case may be?" And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I talked to there were people that I talked about, and I just kind of kept pushing it off. But you were one of the people that said, "John, this is really." Important for you to do, for yourself and for the listener, or whatever the case may be. But I just want I want to kind of thank you publicly for kind of nudging me, even from the point you started nudging me. It still took me over a year.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while, and it wasn't like you told your story and then I was like, oh, that was really good. You should do it. Like even before then, I was like, John, people want to know about you. And it's like, well, they can look at this other podcast that I did or whatever. I'm like, no, this is your podcast and people should hear a little bit about your story. And I'm thrilled that you did that. I think that, I think that having the insight, you have such an incredible story, such an incredible what it was like, such an incredible what happened and kind of what it's like now that, I was so happy to get to hear that the times that I've heard it live and then also get to hear you do it on the air, which was really cool. Yeah.
Well, I just, like I said, I want to, that you're the one, and you weren't like, pushy about it. It was
I tried to nudge, but not, make it to where you're like, oh, here comes Casey again. He's going to tell me to put my story online.
And I still think about the from the night that you were there, the tape that I took, and I actually ended up putting it out there. There was that one girl there.
Yeah,
her name was Katie, and it was her first meeting ever. And you were sitting next to me, and you were like, "Whoa, no pressure, man." That was like, for whatever reason.
You know what's cool though, and this has happened to me a few times where I've spoken somewhere and somebody got a desire chip at that meeting, and then I see them like years later, and they're still sober. There's a lady I'm thinking of specifically at Friendship Group in Louisville, who I do step speaker there occasionally, and this was like 5 or 6 years ago, and she was there and crying, and I'm like, "Oh God, speaker meeting for your first meeting. I'm so sorry. Please come back tomorrow. It'll be better. I promise."
It'll be better.
And she and I have this cute little relationship because we were there and we kind of stayed in touch and talked to each other. And now she got 5 or 6 years sober. And there's plenty of examples like that. I think that's what happens when you continue to be involved in the program. We say, I know people talk about meetings don't keep you sober or whatever it is. I know there's like controversy about 90 meetings in 90 days and keep coming back and all that stuff. The program is the program. It's in the book. 164 pages, do what's out of the book. That's what keeps you sober. Going to meetings for me and seeing somebody who's a newcomer and getting to hear their story, the guy today who was chairing and just listening to his story, coming and doing this podcast with you, knowing that we're going to talk about some things. Like I spent some more time this morning being quiet because I knew we were going to do this today, right? And continuing to be involved like that, just in sponsoring people, service commitments. I feel like all those things are the things that I'm either building momentum towards enlarging my spiritual experience or taking tiny little steps away from God. It's like, I don't ever take these big steps towards anything, but if I'm able to continue to be involved in all 3 sides of the triangle, unity, service, and recovery, it's a snowball, right? If I just do one of those things, it tends to lose momentum. But if I'm doing all 3 with some regularity, the residual of that is not just physical sobriety, but emotional sobriety, happiness, good relationships, waking up and being excited about the day, being able to sleep at night, all those things that I couldn't do before I got here.
So part of what I need to have to do in order to, get an episode out that I can talk about is I have to take some notes. You see me taking notes, and we do this every time. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because what happened during this episode me just talking to you. And what this is much like me and Casey sitting down to have a cup of coffee somewhere, and y'all are just listening in, right? For anybody who wants
that is exactly what's happening right now, honestly.
For anybody who's a glutton for punishment and wants to listen to me and Casey have a conversation. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I was just like intrigued by so many things you were saying, and I just realized I got to the end and was like, oh, I got to write some things down, because it's either that or I go back and listen to the whole episode again. And I love you, Casey, but I'm not.
Nobody wants to do that. Once is enough, John.
All right. So, and the other thing is, I always kind of figure out on the end, what am I going to title this? Right. And we've been so all over the place. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out, or we'll figure it out together, one of the two. Okay. Anything before we wrap it up here that you would like to share with the listeners? Anything that's on your heart? Anything that has meant a lot to you over the past week, or even during our conversation, or anything that's on your heart and mind that you just want to make sure that you get out?
I think two things. One is thank you for doing this, for the time that we get to spend together, and just for doing the podcast. I look forward to Fridays and getting to listen to who the next person that you have speaking. So I appreciate you continuing to do that bit of service work. And then the second thing is meditation is not extra credit, right? If meditation is something that you struggle with, start with what's in the book. Do it every day for 30 days, right? Just the bit that's, upon awakening, as we go throughout the day and when we retire at night. Just give that a try for 30 days. Just do that. 3 to 5 minutes in the morning, 3 to 5 minutes at night. You might find yourself saying, "Thy will, not mine, be done," throughout the day, as you pause and see what happens. It was and continues to be revolutionary in my life. We do these steps, and big things happen when I share my first fifth step, or I make an amends. Like in the moment, a big thing happens to me. Very few times has a big thing happened to me in the moment in meditation when I follow kind of 10 and 11 out of the big book. However, the thing that has changed my life the most has been diligently practicing those two things together over time. This is the way that we let God discipline us, right? Is 10 and 11. And I need to submit myself to that as much as I possibly can, as long as I possibly can, because that's when the big changes come. At least it has for me.
That put a bow on it. That is very well said. Thank you, Casey. All right. Page 164 from the big book. For those of you reading along at home, this is where I am. This is an actual, if you can hear, an actual book. And it's not the big book. It's a small
the tiny big
version.
book.
Right. It's because my desk here, I'm so unprivileged. I've got a small desk.
You poor thing. Poor thing.
So I keep the small version of the big book on my little desk here. All right, it says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Casey W., as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Once again, my friend, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, John. Love you, buddy.
I always enjoy spending time with my friend, Mr. Casey W., and I'm sure that you enjoyed this episode. And if that was the case, please pause that little device that you're on, press that share button, and send out this episode to another friend or family member. It may be just what they need today. Thank you again, Mr. Casey W. Love you, my friend. Now, on to a little bit of listener feedback. This comes in. So I read on the air last week or the week before a kind of a version of this, something that had been sent to my friend Brad, and he relayed that to me, but I'm going to read you what was sent directly to me. And this is from Zach. Zach says the title of the subject line is 6 months sober on the email. And he says, "Hey, John M., my name is Zach M., and I emailed you about 6 months ago. At the time, I was an absolute mess and spiraling out of control. I found your podcast on Spotify when I reached out to you, and you put me in contact with Brad W. My sober date is September 4th of 2022, and my 6 months is in a couple of days." I'm a little behind reading this from listener feedback. But anyway, and he says, "I have worked through the steps with my sponsor, and I am making amends. I just wanted to say how grateful I am for everything you do. I wouldn't be sober today if I hadn't discovered SoberSpeak. And you introducing me to Brad got me started on my journey with AA, hands down the best thing to ever happen to me in my life. I owe my sobriety to you, and discovering your podcast may have saved my life. Thank you sincerely. The program is now a fundamental part of my life, and I'm so excited for what the future holds. You are a beacon of hope for people and are truly inspiring. Thank you for everything you do, one day at a time. And if I'm ever down in the Frisco area, I'd love to come to a meeting. God bless you and keep on keeping on." And the part that Zach did not mention in this email that he wrote is that he found us when he was an inmate, and they gave the inmates access to the SoberSpeak podcast, and I'm sure there are other resources they have available to him. But Zach, that is just so cool, and I'm glad to hear it. And God bless you, and keep on keeping on. And if you are in the Frisco area, let us know. We'd love to come meet you at a meeting. That would be absolutely fantastic. And once again, I want to put another thank you out to my friend Brad, who works with several of the inmates that write into the show. He reaches out to them, and he's got himself a little, I don't know, for lack of a better word, ministry there, or service work that he does with the people that reach out from behind bars. And I'm very, very thankful to Mr. Brad. So thank you very much. Oh, God bless you, Zach. That's fantastic. Lori writes in. Lori says, "Love your podcast to infinity, John M." Well, infinity, that's a mighty long time or a mighty big number. Yeah, probably not saying that right. But anyway, she says, "I am not an alcoholic, but I'm writing a book on emotional sobriety, and your podcast is such a wonderful way to learn about addiction and my own inner emotional drunk." I like how she phrased that. I've got my own inner emotional drunk as well, Lori. So anyway, thank you for writing in. And it sounds like you're going to be a great writer. I hope that book comes out fantastic. Antoinette writes in. Antoinette, what a cool name. She says, "Hello, John M. Thank you for adding me to your Facebook group." Well, the pleasure is all mine, Antoinette. I search, oh, by the way, just in case you're listening to this and you think, well, how come Antoinette gets in that Facebook group and I cannot join the Facebook group? This is not fair. And you start stomping your feet and thinking about all sorts of resentments. Well, guess what? It is available to you as well. Go to Facebook, search up SoberSpeak Secret Group, and we will get you on in there. Just ask for admission. We'd love to have you as part of it as well. Anyway, Antoinette continues. I first went to AA back in 2006 after 2 drunk drivings. I only made it 9 months before deciding I didn't want to lose my friends and family. There would have been an intervention in my family. They are all drinkers. We're all functional alcoholics. Nothing has happened to bring me to quitting except that I'm coming up on my 60th birthday and I'm just done with it. I'm tired of feeling like crap all the time. It's not fun anymore. Today is my quit day. I pulled out my coins from back in the day that I have not seen in years. I was overwhelmed with emotion and know I'm doing the right thing, even though all my relationships will change. I'm in the 24/7 AA meeting tonight. I've been here for 3 hours. I hope that I can sleep tonight. I was in shock on the one episode of the woman who started drinking at 5 years old. That was a crazy story, Antoinette C. I think she's talking about, lady from California. Oops. I think she's talking about June, if I'm not mistaken, but who knows? All right, Antoinette. Well, I'm glad you are back on track, and I hope you got some sleep that night. And thank you for writing in while you were there. I appreciate that. And good luck in your journey. Hillary writes in. She says, "Hi, John," with a big O exclamation point. She says, "I am honored to have my name mentioned on such a great podcast ep today. Your outro was so real and relatable, and Don L was brilliant. I completely connected and resonated to what he was sharing, and especially as I am on step 4 right now. It really opened my understanding to the truth of doing a, quote, real and honest inventory. I feel like I can let go of the victimization of my childhood as I walk through the steps, especially with the permission of the gift of AA and Al-Anon. Good show, John. Keep sending plenty keep sending plenty pods our way. Through God and the sunshine of the Spirit." Romans 8:28, quote, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his promise," unquote. Grace and peace, Hillary. Hillary, grace and peace back at ya. You can't see me doing my little namaste hands right now, but I am. And God bless you. And thanks for letting us, Sober Speak, be a part of your journey, a small part of your journey. Thank you so much. Vivian writes in, and Vivian says, "Dear John, I was listening to this week's episode. Excellent as usual." And she's talking about David G's episode. Yes. "And I heard the feedback at the end of the episode criticizing you for laughing at Jeff V. Naturally, I had to go back and re-listen to that episode because I couldn't understand. I did not hear anything offensive at all. Your laughter is empathetic, and not humiliating. We all have our stuff to work through, and, quote, anonymous, unquote, is probably struggling with life. Whenever I feel hurt or resentful, I learn from Joe and Charlie, big smiley face, to pray for that person. It helps me to see them as a human who deserves understanding just like me. I bet that person anonymous is in a lot of pain, and you're an easy target because you make yourself so accessible. It is part of being in the public square. But anyway, she says, you are doing a wonderful service, which I cherish, along with the thousands of other listeners. Thank you so much, Vivian M. So just in case you didn't hear it, there was somebody who wrote in, and I don't know, they weren't real happy about my particular laugh. And they also gave me a diagnosis, which I had never had before. So let me see if I can find this real quick. The person anonymous who wrote in says, They were talking about me, and he said he exhibits all the symptoms of ADD, ADHD. Meanwhile, laughs at him during the interview. People in that mental frame, she's talking to me about me, generally have addiction issues. Well, duh. They're Well, they're on whether they're on medication or not, they try to calm their mind at the end of the day, and it's a huge struggle. Well, I can agree with that. He mentioned criticism, he's talking about me, was given his way and you laughed. This is what we call rejection sensitive dysphoria. Those with ADD, ADHD are prone to this. I hate how you laugh at him. You are what we call atypical. I was on board with your podcast until this one, but your lack of sensitivity for anyone who doesn't look like you mentally, your lack of sensitivity for anyone who doesn't look like you mentally is disgusting. I just had to go back and look at that again. It was very, very interesting, very, very pointed. But anyway, Vivian, thank you for writing in. I appreciate ya very much. And, everyone's got their opinion, right? Thank you. Safi writes in. Now, that is a cool name right there. Safi, Saffy. Anyway, she says, "Hi, John. I just heard one of your podcasts and I absolutely loved, in big capital letters, loved it. You are kind and delightful and funny. All the good stuff I love about AA. I'm a worker among workers in, gosh, I hope I get this right, Suquamish, Washington. I'm 14 years sober by the grace of God. Thank you for your lovely podcast, Safi B." That is really cool. The name and what you wrote in. Thank you, Safi. Mateo writes in and he says, John, and the subject line was David G. You may eventually get sick of hearing from me, but I couldn't help myself today. Wow, what an episode with David G. Boy, does it feel great and makes me feel a bit silly about myself, self-centeredness, to hear another person acknowledge the selfish, self-centered thinking that has been a main driver in my life. If I can just get away with stuff, I really didn't do anything that wrong. That's the quote. That's me, says Mateo, wanting the softest bed in the hotel or the best room in the Airbnb. That was me for years when touring with my band while in the midst of a full-blown alcoholism. Reinventing myself to be a giving, altruistic person is now the main driver, and I really need to hear this conversation today. As always, thank you, John M. Appreciate it. So, Mateo says, I'm back at work this week after 6 weeks of paternity leave with little Miss Ophelia. I've seen pictures of her. I put the little miss in there, but he just said with Ophelia, and really am trying hard to bring these principles into every aspect of my life. It feels good to check in with my 10-step app at night and not have anything to admit I was dishonest about or that needs amends. I'll keep striving every day. I'm going to listen to this episode several more times to try to get as much out of this goodness in my heart and soul as I can. Hope you are very well. Hope you and the family are very well, Sir Mateo V. Well, I am doing well, especially today. Now that could change within an hour or whatever, Mateo, but thank you for writing in, and I'm glad you're able to get back after work after 6 weeks of paternity leave with their little Miss Ophelia. Joy writes in, and Joy says, when I was a kid, by the way, this has nothing to do with it. We always used to say, and then he hopped up and jumped for joy. But Joy wasn't real happy about that. Anyway, I digress significantly. Joy writes in and she says, hi, John. Sorry. I just repeated that about 3 or 4 times. I live in the middle of nowhere, Bushnell, Illinois. I moved here from San Diego about 4 years ago to be closer to my family. Boy, it's been a ride, laugh out loud. Change of pace, change of everything. The transition hasn't been easy, but I am surviving. The last time I committed to recovery was in 2005. I managed to string together 8 years during that time. I found religion, band-aided my relationships, and experienced a couple of miracles, but then I slipped away from the fellowship. For me, it was NA, Narcotics Anonymous. I am returning to the rooms after a 10-year run, albeit mostly virtual Zoom. I haven't gone back to my original drug of choice since I was first introduced to the 12-step recoveries, but I've never denied that I'm an addict. This time it is definitely different. I have a newfound willingness to stay sober, and I've run out of reservations. I found your podcast, and I'm excited to hear more speakers. It's currently my meeting in between meetings. I've backed myself into isolation, can't even commit to a home church or recovery group, but I know if I'm working a program of recovery, there might still be hope to change my thinking so I can find some sense of peace and perhaps change direction. I jumped back on the bandwagon of dry January to help me wean off the daily marijuana habit, and somehow along the way decided I like being clear-headed again and started looking into recovery. I have 62 days without alcohol and drug-free today. Thank you for holding the space for the podcast. Warmest regards, Joy H. Well, God bless you, Joy H, and I'm glad that you are back on the right path. John writes in, he says, "Hey, John, how's it going? I just wanted to keep in touch and update you with how things are going. I took my 60-day chip last week. Without a doubt, this winter has been a whole new experience in my recovery. I know that this has been the result of being closer to God and working the 12 steps. I'm currently working through my 9th step amends, and I've begun practicing step 10 in my daily life. I have one last financial amends to make, which I will be completing in the next week or so." Good for you, John. "I was listening to your personal story episode last month and hearing you talk about making amends to your mom and how it gave you the opportunity to rebuild your relationships with her in a way you never expected. And that really hit me. It's like this voice came to me and says, quote, 'Pay your parents back,' unquote. So I started with my dad, and I will finish with my restitution to my mom very soon." God, you're doing the work. That is great, John. He says, "I feel so privileged to have put my heart into my recovery this winter and have sober speak as a huge part of that. I'm getting close to having to listen to all the episodes. This morning, I started listening to Marty C's episodes again, and I'm getting so much more out of it all over again. I spent the last couple of days going through Charlie P's series, and I can't help but think how lucky we are to have this golden experience at our fingertips. To hear guys' experience about how they went through new outlooks about AA with long-term sobriety gives us a chance to truly have the experience from the start if we choose to. This is the path I believe I am on, and I am extremely grateful for that. I began helping another guy go through the steps over the last month, and I think that gentleman wrote into me, and you turned him on to the podcast, John. Thank you. At first, I was unsure if it was too early, but my sponsor says it might be the best thing for me. Yes, I agree, and getting started soon is better. Listening to Marty talk about this confirms what I am doing and what the program suggests. It has been a wonderful experience for both of us thus far. I figure I will update you each month on my journey in recovery, God willing. Here is a couple of pics at the setting that I listened to Sober Speak, and while working away in northeastern British Columbia, Canada through the winter. Best wishes and thank you so much for your service. Praying hands, John D. And it looks really, really cold up there, Mr. John D. Stay warm and sober, and thank you for the beautiful pictures. I appreciate it. Ashley writes in and she says, "Hey, John, I have enjoyed listening to your podcast and I have felt so much comfort in knowing I'm not alone. I live in Cypress, Texas, just outside of Houston. My sobriety date is June 5th of 2022. I just wanted to say thank you for all you do for the sober community. Your podcast provides such comfort and support and humor and things a lot of people wouldn't consider funny." I agree there. She says, "You are amazing and very much appreciated, Ashley W." Well, Ashley, I think you're amazing. I don't know how amazing I am, but I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the guests that we have on and all of the listeners, all of you. Finally, Brad writes in and he says, 2 years, March 10th. And Brad says, "John, a quick note. I made it. I'm Brad R., and I've shared with you a couple of times in the past. Yesterday, March 10th, and I'm a bit behind in reading this, I made 2 years. God bless you, Mr. Brad R. That's fantastic." He says, "Thanks to my sponsor, meetings, and your podcast, I'm living and not just surviving. This program helps me understand the difference daily. I want to say thank you, Brad R." Well, God bless you and thank you, Brad R. All right, everybody, that wraps up another week. And my voice has been going out here lately when I'm doing these things. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. May God bless you and keep you until then. I plan to be back next week, but I take this 1 week at a time. Love you guys. Bye-bye.